The EU was formed in the last century. I think it's now looking very last century. It certainly won't survive into the next. The question is, how much longer has it got in this one?
The right-wing populism in Europe is now playing for the win. They are not here to be tamed. They have tasted blood. They see that the former political elites are weak, and the cordon sanitaire, the exclusion from them in the coalition building, actually shielded them from all the political mistakes made by the centrist forces in the last decades.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this first session of the international theme of the Battle of Ideas 2025. My name's Tony Gilland. I'm the Chief of Staff for MCC Brussels. It's a think tank that likes to ask difficult questions. It fights for free speech, much like this festival, and generally causes trouble in the Brussels bubble. With this session, EU in crisis. Will the Eurocrats survive?
I start with three theses in this discussion. And the very first one is that forget the EU institutions, focus on what is happening in the member states. Everybody's talking about Ursula von der Leyen and the EU Parliament, or sometimes what's happening in the EU Council. But the whole power that EU institutions actually have comes from the weakness of the member states. The entire bureaucratic inertia of the European Commission is only possible because the member states are handing over power actively to Brussels instead of being kind of like brakes or checks and balances to its power. For one example is the EU budget. Many of the member states are actually on the verge of bankruptcy, so they are very happy that the EU is spending more money. Also, many member states are very weak governments, so they are very happy that the EU Commission is taking over politically sensitive issues, so they don't fight in the European Council for their own interest. And then we could go on and go on, even into the judiciary, where the European Court of Justice is only so powerful because other once proud national courts are not daring to stand up for their own jurisdictions. That's continuing to the EU Parliament. The EU Parliament still today is only mirroring the national party systems. So there is no European party system. There are only 27 national party systems. So the EU Parliament is a mere shadow of the national parliaments. There is no own dynamic political party dynamic behind the EU Parliament. So there's also a questionable democratic legitimation of the European Parliament, because what is the added benefit of the European Parliament compared to the European Council if it's only reflecting the national party systems? So the big question is now, why are the member states so weak? And just look across the channel to France, where one government is handing over power to the other one. But if we go also to Germany, the current German government had a majority of 9,000 votes in the last elections. And we were talking about the two major political parties in Germany forming the formerly two biggest political parties, barely making it over the 50% threshold in the votes. And compare this situation to 30 years ago, in the early 2000s, when France, Germany, and Italy had completely different setups, economic dynamics, and also, of course, we had the UK still in the European Union. Then I come to the second part, that there is a revolution happening across Europe in the member states. This is why I told you, focus on the member states. 30 years ago, 25 years ago, in 2000, we had social democratic powerhouses across Europe. Germany was ruled by Gerhard Schröder's SPD. France, actually, even though Jacques Chirac was the president, had a socialist majority in parliament under Lionel Jospin, and of course Tony Blair's heyday was still there, and Italy was also ruled by the Social Democrats. So the four biggest member states were under the political left's rule. Today, only three Social Democrat leaders remain in Europe. One of them is Malta, the other one is Lithuania, and then we have Spain, which is and Pedro Sanchez's government is on the brink of collapse every day. And every other member state is ruled by either a centrist, so which means a liberal conservative force, or a right-wing populist government. This is a completely different political landscape that we had before. And the political game has become, is not left or against right, it's the conservative, liberal, centrist, often legacy forces, alliances, against rising populist right-wing forces across Europe. And in many cases, look at Poland, where we had the European People's Party, so conservative liberal force uniting with liberal parties and even the remnants of the left against PiS and Confederacja, which are both populist right-wing parties. Now it's much more than migration. It's about industry and jobs, actually. This is the new battlefield, where the populist right-wing force has discovered that they have actually much more to offer than this one topic of migration. So they are now, and this is the third and last point I want to make, the right-wing populism in Europe is now playing for the win. They are not here to be tamed. The only place where they could be tamed was Scandinavia, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, but to a lesser degree in the Netherlands. Italy is a kind of a middle position, but everywhere else, they are now out there for pluralities or even majorities in the parliament. They have tasted blood. They see that the former political elites are weak, and the cordon sanitaire, the exclusion from them in the coalition building, actually shielded them from all the political mistakes made by the centrist forces in the last decades. So there is one thing that is still a big open question, that this is still not a coherent movement, even though the political left always compares it to obviously the Hitler movement of the 1930s to scare the people. Now we have the big question how this is going to be a coherent movement, and as the EU's old system is coming down, what comes next?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I'm going to discuss three things: energy, immigration, and free speech. And we're here in the UK. The UK has escaped the Brussels yoke, they think. But when it comes to energy, Britain is still voluntarily aligning with the European Union approach on energy. Now, it may come to a surprise to some politicians, but energy is incredibly important for economic fate. And our base industry in Europe, the chemical industry, is heavily dependent on the energy price. Now, if you look at what they're up against, the American natural gas price, which thanks to shale gas is very low, only 20% of the European natural gas price. I think it's sort of self-evident why our chemical industry is currently divesting in the UK, in Germany, in Belgium, where I'm from, in the Netherlands. And this is a very big problem, because even if you turn things around, it takes 10, 20 years before you rectify the situation. These are long-term investments. Now, if you look at the European natural gas price, it's like almost 5 times as high as the American one. But within the European natural gas price, the part that is the climate taxation, the ETS taxation of the European Union, which the UK is voluntarily aligning with that system, it's almost twice as high as the total American natural gas price. In other words, we can start shale gas in Europe, we can go full for nuclear power, which is not always so handy for industry because they need gas or coal. We can do all those things, drill baby drill, whatnot, but that's of course a 10, 20 years change. What we can do tomorrow in the UK and in Europe is to completely abolish the ETS climate taxation scheme. That would give a massive push to the competitiveness of our chemical industry, which is the base of all other industries. And interestingly, Sir Jim of INEOS, a big British chemical concern, which is also investing a lot in Antwerp, for example, over the last few days, if you go to the Twitter account of INEOS, he's really been starting to campaign for that. And I think this is very welcoming, because for a long time industry has been, way too shy about this. And I can tell you, at the continent, it's not yet catching on. We're seeing the chemical industry disappearing. In Germany, companies of more than 100 years old are shutting down. It's a very big problem, and this is a key factor for the great economic problems that Europe is currently going through. In the UK, I may say there's some hope. I understand Reform is planning to scrap the whole thing altogether. So that's good. Now, what about climate change, you may ask? Well, if you compare with the CO2 emissions in Europe compared with those in the United States since 2005, despite the EU having a cap-and-trade scheme and sort of indirect climate taxation, the per capita emission reduction in the States has been bigger than in Europe. Now, I don't want to simplify, but at least it shows that another path is possible, that central planning and taxation is not the only way to promote environmental sustainability. In the US, for example, a main factor was the fact that they could replace coal with shale gas, which has downsides for the environment. Europe is very much against it, but of course we're not against importing it from the States at exorbitant prices. Then the second thing, massive, is immigration. Well, the Tory government tried with the Rwanda plan. This was, of course, imperfect, but I think the truth is that there's only one first world country that has been able to more or less completely stop illegal migration, and that's Australia. They have told people that want to apply for asylum, yes, you can still apply for asylum, but you will never get it in Australia if you sneak in illegally. If you get asylum, then the Australian government secures asylum somewhere else. They have provided asylum in places like Cambodia, for example, also US. Now, for 20 years, this has been consensus for the right and the left in Australia. And before this system was in place, Australia also had 2,000 people dying at sea. In Europe, people look down at, especially people on the left, on the Australian system or the Rwanda plan. But if you look at the statistics in Europe, we had 30,000 people dying in the Mediterranean Sea. So I don't think we're in any place to, to send moral lessons. And I think, yeah, like wherever you stand on migration, if you want a lot more of it or a lot less, clearly the democratic decisions on who can enter, who cannot, should be respected. Interestingly, in this regard is that, I think it was last week, 19 European countries, including Britain, warned the judges in Strasbourg of the European Convention of Human Rights to stop taking such an unreasonable interpretation. They have, for example, interpreted Article 3 of the Convention, which in itself is fine, the ban on torture, as some kind of a restriction on asylum, which is seen by many lawyers as an unreasonable interpretation. Then, last but not least, free speech. Maybe then that's more, let's say, an EU-specific thing, but Brexit was one of the events which made the EU conclude that clearly the people were misinformed, can't be trusted. All this social media, it's very dangerous. We need to control it. So they came up with the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, which introduces things like state-sanctioned trusted flaggers. America's challenging it. Jim Jordan, for example, American politician. But also in Europe, there's more and more criticism. America's big tech is against it. But that's, I think, at the EU legislative level, concerning development when it comes to free speech.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pieter. Okay, Suzanne, what's your take?
So, on will the Eurocrats survive? Mm-hmm. I hope not. I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear me say that. But obviously hope isn't a strategy. So why do I think their demise is also very likely? And I think, as previous speakers have attested, really, the centre can't hold. The centrist ideal is kind of gone. The EU, I think at its heart, really, is a grotesque attempt to force together dozens of countries with different cultures, languages, histories, economics, politics, domestic laws and structures of government. And these kind of forced federations never last the test of time. I think history is testament to that. They always ultimately fail sooner or later. I think, so in the EU's case, like anything other, it's really just a question of when. Is it going to be in my lifetime or not? And increasingly, I think it is. Not least, too, because of the many problems that the European Union has itself created. And again, that's already been spoken about, really. The massive uncontrolled immigration that's become a problem. We see it very clearly here in the UK, but it's not just our problem. The direct attacks on democracy, the supremacy of the nation state, its unwillingness or inability, because you've got so many people being forced together, its inability to reform itself, not just its unwillingness. The imposition of high taxes, endless regulation, expensive regulation, things like net zero legislation, the climate taxes, again, forcing up energy costs, which have been a real wake-up call, I think, for very many people, that this is something, when you see your own bills go up because of regulation, and the whole knowledge, I think, around climate taxes has become much more to the forefront of public awareness now. So yeah, I think it's created these problems, and it's not going to survive them. I think, like many people of my generation and the previous one, I think it did begin for the best of reasons, trying to bring peace and prosperity to a nation that was absolutely torn apart by war. But we were told it was a common market, and it's travelled 1 million miles away from that. It's salami sliced away sovereignty of member states. As I said, you've got endless regulations, bureaucratic, prohibitive rules, clamping down on entrepreneurism. I remember when I was working for an MEP, someone came into our office. They had this great idea to put flakes of gold in water and sell it to high-end weddings, but it wasn't allowed because although you can put gold in vodka and alcohol, you're not allowed to put it in water, so the whole thing was banned before it even got off the ground. That's just one tiny example of the way in which it prohibits anything that's innovative and new. So you had this like trade deal that's now got its own, I'd argue, fake, because it's anti-democratic parliament, its own military, it's got embassies around the world, it's got its own bizarre national anthem, huge global PR and marketing budget, and this undemocratic, tiny, unelected commission whose sole aim in life, I think, seems to be to make our lives as difficult as possible. So, yeah, it can't hold because it's assured its own road to ruin by becoming so dictatorial and so totalitarian that everybody now is waking up and can't stand it. It's like the Romans of the biblical times. You've got this power being imposed, taxes taken from the people, and everybody says, enough, we hate it, we want it finished. And Brexit's obviously the clearest example of that to date. But so, as again we've already heard, is the rise of so-called populist Eurosceptic movements, and the fact so many EU member countries themselves now, the governments themselves, are rebelling and refusing to comply with its edicts on immigration. As Peter mentioned, you've got Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, all opposed to EU plans for mandatory refugee relocation requests. France, Italy, Denmark, Austria, Croatia, Bulgaria, Greece, the Netherlands, and even migration-friendly Sweden have at some point closed their borders in the last few years or introduced stricter border controls in defiance of the EU's Schengen policy. 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. Things have changed dramatically. Economics, Italy pushing back against the EU's strict budgetary rules. Even Macron in France has threatened to push for reinterpreting EU rules on social programmes and infrastructure working. Even EU-friendly France is fed up with it. I'll mention it again because I think it is significant. Constant pushback about net zero, which you mentioned von der Leyen's confidence vote. That was part of it. The net zero climate wasn't the whole issue, but that was a significant part of why that. No, sorry, my microphone's not very good, perhaps. Or I'm not talking into it. That's better. So that was part of that. The Eurozone, which was supposed to bring financial stability and financial unity, failing massively, entrenching economic division and the north-south divide. So actually, I think now the EU was formed in the last century. I think it's now looking very last century. It certainly won't survive into the next. The question is, how much longer has it got in this one? That's the question, I think.
Great question. Thank you for that.
The question is, will the Eurocrats survive? I think they have to survive. For two reasons they have to survive. One is that the danger of a fragmented and unstable Europe is something that nobody wants. We've seen previously in the past what this can lead to. So you're all here today to listen to a Europe debate. There are many other interesting things happening. I guess you're here because you care about Europe. You want to know what's going to happen in Europe. It's incredibly important for the United Kingdom. So I believe that the EU must survive. I think that the people that are running the EU believe it must survive. And that's a different thing. I think that the people who are running the EU but who are facing a lot of the electoral ballot box pressures that they're seeing today are very scared that they're losing control of the machine. They are increasingly leaning towards authoritarian means, as Pieter highlighted. We have digital policies that are being brought in place that can be used to censor. We've got Marine Le Pen, who's banned from running in the next French election. We had a Romanian candidate who was, we thought some fairly unacceptable things in my point of view, but he was arbitrarily removed from the ballot box using this digital policy that the EU had passed. So I think the EU is panicking, Brussels is panicking. They can see this popular revolt happening everywhere, but it isn't a European phenomenon. Of course, we know that. We've seen what happened in the United States. We saw Brexit in the United Kingdom. This popular uprising that we're seeing everywhere is manifesting in different ways. And Richard went into a lot of the detail there about how this is manifesting at the national level. France is handling it a certain way, Germany another, Spain another. This is about how systems manage the pressures that they feel from below. And I believe the EU must survive, and to do so, it must adapt the way that it's behaving at the moment. This disrespect for the voters, this attempt to try to silence opposition parties, to try to exclude them from polite society if they bring up climate policy, if they bring up migration, if they bring up COVID policy. This idea that we can just exclude the people that we don't want to listen to and we can just continue going as we always have done is reaching a crisis point now. Should the French government fall under the control of Marine Le Pen, should Germany fall under the control of the AfD at a subsequent election, that really puts the European project under threat. These are parties who would look to bring powers back to the national capitals. Now, that might be the solution. So my fear, the point I want to get across is that as this coalition of parties that has run the EU from the very beginning, we have the Christian Democrats, we have the Socialists, we have the Liberals, and the Greens kind of jump in and out of that coalition. They have managed the EU since the conception of the project. These are parties that have always been involved. Their power is now, as Richard said, at the lowest it's probably ever been. Their share of the votes in the Parliament, their share of the votes in the Council, their number of commissioners in the Commission is at the lowest it's ever been. So they now face a challenge of can they bring these other voices, these dissenting, these sceptics into the room to find a solution, or will they try to keep them out by interfering in elections, funding certain parties, banning others, banning newspapers? We've seen that they are starting to take that authoritarian step. It's very important for them, for Europe, for me, but it's also very important for Britain that that doesn't happen. But as I say, this isn't a European phenomenon. We've seen it in the US, Donald Trump being banned from Twitter. We see the attempts also by this Labour government here to try to restrict speech. So I very much echo what Pieter was saying, that these policies that sound very unthreatening, the Digital Services Act, but when you look into the detail and you see how it's used, there are grave threats to the future of the way that we can express ourselves democratically. So I think that I'll leave it there, Tony. And
okay, James, thanks very much indeed.